Om Aganati Manandasya Ganangana Sarakya Chaksurun Miritam Yana Tasmai Srigirave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manovistam Sapitam Yana Bhutare Sayam Rupa Karamayam Darati Swaparantikam Vandeham Sigiru Siyata Parakamaram Shigaran Vaishnavam Sya Sigirupam Sagaritam Sahagana Ragaratam Vitam Stam Sadevam Sadvaitam Sabarutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Ladita Shivishakhan Vitam Sham Narayanam Namaskritam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devam Sarasatim Vyasam Tito Jayodhira Neshtapariyashu Abhadyeshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagati Adamashuki Bhakti Bhavati Naistiki Nigamauka Padarugaradyam Param Shukamakaram Rita Dravisamitam Pivata Bhagavatam Rashamarya Mahora Horishikavaham Krishna Sadham Bhagate Dharmigyan Hesha Karanastadu Shamisha Parana Kodunoditam Trama Piada Vishuddha Vishuddham Vibhusam Apyarayana Virambarutsaram Prokyahidaho Mararam Sanklesha Nirvanam Santina Yatam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vasaya Bhutare Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tanamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Bhajani Nirvasheswani Varivaskata Desarani Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. Welcome one and all to WW Wisdom Wednesday. Malina Priti from Malaysia, Rupa Manjari, Joe, so earlier there, Anjali, thank you Anjali. Good morning to one and all. We started this week with the 36th verse in the 3rd chapter, first canto Srimad Bhagavatam, and there's so much there, so much nectar there. Now we're discussing it for the 3rd consecutive day in a row. Tunde tanaviri natam batanate tandavala labde karna korda kanamini katayate karnavira vishpa. Rupa Goswami said there's so much nectar in the syllables Krishna, Rama, Hare that he wished he had hundreds of mouths with which to chant and hundreds of ears with which to hear. So similarly, we're just touching on the surface, seeing the tip of the iceberg with each and every one of these verses as our realization and spiritual maturity deepens and broadens, more and more transcendental nectarine truths become revealed to us. So anyway, for the 3rd day in a row, we could go 30, we could go 300. But for the 3rd day in a row, let's again churn the nectar which is contained within this particular verse. Sa va idam visham amogalila srijati avati ati nasajate shmin bhuteshu chantarhita atmatantra sadvargikam jigrati sadguneshaha. The Lord, whose activities are always spotless, is the master of the 6 senses and is fully omnipotent with 6 opulences. Aishwarya Shamagrisha Viryasya Yasasya Gyanam Bhagaryasyabi Sanam Bhagamitingana. Wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and humility. The most powerful, the most smart, the most good looking, the funniest is also the most humble. And to me, that's the most striking of all those 6 opulences. And he, the possessor of 6 opulences, and the master of the 6 senses, Rishikesha Rishikena Sevanam, creates the manifested universes, maintains them, and annihilates them without being in the least bit affected. He is within every living being and is always independent. Just like you push the button, the play button of a tape recorder, and you walk away. And the tape recorder is programmed in such a way as to do what it does without your personal you don't have to go in and personally make the digital audio file move forward. You don't have to personally turn the spool of a cassette or a reel-to-reel. Just push the play button and then everything else is programmed. So Krishna sets everything in motion. He's the Karana Karanam. He's the cause of all causes, the first cause. He himself has no other cause. And then he has his separate, independent existence apart from this material world. He expands himself, enters into, pervades, and supports everything through his Paramatma, a super soul feature, but he himself is aloof from this material world. We talked about this verse yesterday, which is found, and Prashant, our researcher, tracked it down, so it's in, the link is in the comment section yesterday and perhaps even the day before. Brahmaja, this is the Satya Samhita, Brahmabhya Yajna Valkaja, Muchate Sri Sahayana, Bodhanche, Che Ke Chanai Te Sham Bisha Sham Chavidu Vidu. Sometimes it is found among exalted personalities like Lord Brahma that the wife and children are not the cause of bondage. On the contrary, the wife actually helps further spiritual life and liberation. We talked about all the pitfalls of sex life. The major stumbling block for advancement in spiritual life is the attraction between men and women, and the hard knot that comes about due to connection with women, and through the woman, expansion of interests and activities and consciousness. Through the woman come children, land, residences, businesses, even charities, and so on and so forth. So that funnel through the connection of the man with the woman is basically the strongest cause of material attachment and bondage in this material world. It is the reason why the vast majority of living beings in this material world have really no interest in going back to home, back to God, even though they're being frustrated time and time again, lifetime after lifetime, by the process of engaging in family life and sex life. They still think that there's hope at the end of the tunnel. They think if they just try it one more time, there'll be a huge breakthrough. The sun will shine through, and they'll achieve full and complete and eternal happiness. But such, unfortunately, is not to be. We have lamas here, and the male lama has pretty much always got an active libido, but the females are induced ovulators. They're not always so interested. Most of the time, they're not very interested in sex life. So when the male comes running up, he's like eager beaver. He's bouncing up. Lamas could smile. You could see a big smile on his face, and approaching the female lama for sex life, and she wants nothing of it. In fact, you can tell that if lamas could have facial expressions, the edges of her lips would be turned down, her eyes would be shooting darts at him, and the way that she cools his ardor, of course, as you all know, spit happens, right? She spits grass in his face. And someone might say, well, what's so off-putting about getting grass in your face? Well, it's been through 4 stomachs and it's coming back up again. So it is the most obnoxious stuff in the creation. People always ask me, do llamas spit? Or have you ever been spit on a llama? Twice in 35 years of raising llamas have been spit at. Most of the time they don't spit at humans. It's only when the human is being particularly obnoxious. And usually they warn you first by putting their ears down, and then they'll kind of clear their throat like, so if the ears are down and they've just cleared their throat, then you're on notice. If you continue bothering them in the way that you're bothering them, then you will get green cud all over you, and however many times you shower, the smell will not go away for at least 3 or 4 days. So the male llama gets a full load of this, not just the ears back, not just the clearing of the throat. Sometimes they'll do a clear mist, which smells slightly bad, but it is nothing like the regurgitated greenness that makes up the spray of the actual spit. So the male llama gets spit at, and it cools his ardor immediately, and it creates such a disgusting odor that you don't see the male llama even eat. His appetite has been put off for at least a day or so. And yet he never gives up. The next day he's bouncing up. Same thing happens, gets spit in the face again and again and again, until such time as the female is induced to ovulate. She becomes stimulated erotically by a certain gurgling sound that the male makes. But the optimism springs eternal. That is the main reason why living beings rotate in this material world, why they elongate and extend their sojourn in this material world unnecessary. Our home is actually the spiritual world. Back to home, back to Godhead. We needn't have come here in the first place. We needn't have subjected ourselves to the assumption of material body and consequent birth, death, disease, and old age. We needn't prolong it. We just have to chant Hare Krishna, put sex life in its right perspective, dovetail it in the service of the Lord, and we can go back to home, back to God within the very, very near future. But the problem is not the difficulty of the practice. The problem is not the actual process of going back to home, back to Godhead, but the real problem is there's a lack of desire. People's desires are perverted, diverted to the female form, or vice versa to the male form, and being dazzled and illusioned and mesmerized in that way. Very, very few people, souls in this material world, actually want to go back home, back to Godhead. Therefore, I think it's in the second verse of the 7th chapter, Krishna says, Manushanam kasreshu yastitiri yatatanam pisaram kastid mam vedi tatparaha. Out of thousands, very few are interested in spiritual perfection. Out of thousands that are interested, very few actually embark upon it. Thousands that embark upon it, very few come to realize the difference between the spirit and the body. And then if you realize that out of thousands who realize the difference between the spiritual body, they become realized, and then they step back from the feverishness of sexual attraction and the consequent family life. Now in this verse it says that sex is not in and of itself bad. The attraction of a man and a woman is not in and of itself bad. It's there in some degree in the spiritual world. It's there originally in Supreme Personality of Godhead. Prabhupada said when people see the cover of the Krishna book, they generally say, who's that girl with Krishna? The Krishna is called, in the first verse, first canto, first chapter of the Bhagavatam, Janmariyasya yataha navayari tadastartashu vignasarat tene brahmavida ya arikvayamatyari tejo variminam tadavinimauti shargamisham damna shveda saranarista kuakas param satyam dimahi. The absolute truth is defined as that from which everything comes. So there's nothing in this world, no emotion or no feeling or no phenomenon or no psychology, which does not have its origin in that from which everything comes. Makes sense, right? So if the biggest feature of this material world, the thing that's most notable, is the attraction between male and female, then that must have had its origin in the absolute truth. And indeed, when you see the Krishna book, there is a girl beside Krishna. The only difference is, in the love between Krishna and Radha, there's no selfishness, there's no self-interest. It is the purest and highest emblem of true love. Radhika is all for Krishna, and Krishna is all for Radhika. The closest glimpse that we get of this selfless love in the material world is the love of a parent. Aside from erotic love, aside from the love of a man and a woman, there is the love of a parent for their child. And this resonates. This indicates the selfless love that Krishna has for Radha and Radha has for Krishna. Parents would rather feed their children and go hungry themselves. Parents would sacrifice their lives in order to save the lives of their children. They focus on the other and not on themselves. So in this material world, it is entirely possible, due to the powerful, engaging effects of devotional service to the Lord, for husband and wife and parents and children to work as partners side by side in the service of the Lord. In fact, it takes your love to a higher level. The love of a spouse for a spouse, the love of a parent for a child, by service in the greater cause, service for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, actually unleashes a whole level of love which can never be experienced when one is self-centered in this material world. We often find that men and women who have been in the armed forces back in Vietnam or Korea, they'll have a reunion, a 20-year-old, a 40-year-old reunion. When they get together, it's like they never left. It's like they don't really have to get reacquainted. There's that connection, automatic, a lifelong connection. You know, one guy, even if they didn't serve together, if one elderly man or one other guy or girl says, were you in the service? Yeah, I was in the 5th Armored Division. There's immediately a resonance. There's immediately a connection there. That's what service does. Instead of serving your own limited senses like an animal, those who serve a greater cause, serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or even serve in the military, that service makes a bond, a connection, clears the obstacles for a level of love that nobody who's stuck in this selfish, egotistical point of view can ever really taste. I gave yesterday the example, my wife and I are coming up on 50 years of marriage, and we served together, unmarried, in the temple in Australia a year before that. So 51 years of service. And I don't know, I can't speak for anyone else, but my connection, my bond with my wife is extremely strong, because our basis of our relationship wasn't a bodily attraction. Of course, that's always part of it when you're young and the hormones are raising. But a lifelong married life immersed in service ultimately outgrows the short-lived infatuation of body for body. And what gives it resonance, what gives it authenticity over the long haul is the service. And so I can say that my wife and I have had a wonderful adventure together. I wouldn't have traded even a moment for it for any other experience in the world. I remember reading an article, I think it might have been a Back to Godhead article, about a National Geographic photographer who was on a train in India. And sitting across from him was a wizened old Indian farmer, tan, dark skin from the sun, straw hat, clothes that weren't brand spanking new, not a paragon of wisdom according to our Western preconceptions or stereotypes, but the man asked this 35, 36, 37-year-old photographer from National Geographic, are you married? And the Western photographer said, no, he said, I'm waiting for true love. And when the Indian farmer heard that, he just started laughing and laughing and laughing, holding his sides and everything. And the American photographer said, what? What did I say? What? And the Indian man, he said, true love comes after many, many years of marriage. So if you're not getting married because you're waiting to get struck with true love, like getting struck by a bolt of lightning, it's not going to happen that way. They say love at first sight. No, it's never love at first sight. It's love is a function of character. Love kicks in when you're committed to the long haul. Love is not at first sight. Love rears its beautiful head at 100 sight, at 1,000 sight, at a 50,000 sight, at 100,000 sights. The more that you see your wife, the more that love should be there, because you have more and more of a history, more and more of a history of service together. And love is the result of the composite of the passage of time. It's a result of the vows and commitments that you've made and that you're still being faithful to. And it's a result of the service, first and foremost, that you do side by side for the Lord. Now, my wife and I never had kids, but if you've been listening to our classes the last few days, you'll know that I have set up as a shining example of an ideal preacher, an ideal devotee, an ideal scholar, and an ideal husband, and an ideal father is Radhika Raman. Ravi Gupta, again, as we mentioned, he's the chair of religious studies at Utah State University. He has a wife, he has two wonderful boys who are giving every indication they're going to be powerful Vaishnava preachers as they grow up. And here's a family unit of, the American unit, wife, husband, and two kids, exactly. It's called the nuclear family, I believe it was used to be called. And they're perfectly on the path of devotional service. You take an arrow and you put it you notch it on the string of your bow, and you pull the bow to its full extension, so it's almost like a circle. Then you release it, and that impetus launches the arrow from its shooting sight and sends it on a trajectory with incredible power, incredible velocity. So I have no doubt that the parenting that Anantarupa, Ravi Gupta, and his wife are doing so far, their children are concerned, is going to result in two young boys who are going to be luminaries in the sky, who are going to be moons in the sky, who are going to be forces in their own right for good and for divinity in their generation. Here's a verse from the 4th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, 22nd verse, 39th. Yat para pankaja palash virakara karmasiram garitam udgarantyanti sanda taravam manurikto matyo ritu shotigaram staram bharavasudevam. Whereas 99.999% of living entities, and this includes the animals, of course, as well, they are overcome, overwhelmed, paralyzed, imprisoned, bound up by their hard, knotted desires for sex life and through sex life, fruitive activities, name and fame, to the point it's almost impossible to extricate themselves from family life. Even an old man, who should be free of desires for family life, who hasn't felt or hormonal urge for sex life for 40 or more years, still at his dying moment, he's thinking about his daughters who haven't been married, or about his son who's trying to get into a college. Right up to the fag end of life, his mind is focused on the concerns of his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. There's great virtue in raising a family. There's great character to be built in terms of providing for family members, but one should retire around the age of 50 and divest oneself of all these distractions, preparing oneself to go back to home, back to Godhead at the time of leaving this body. The end of life is not for ruminating over your children or grandchildren or grandchildren. It is said the end of life is meant to prepare for the life that never ends. Therefore, in our traditional Vedic society, around the ages of 50, the husband and wife will take frequent trips to places of pilgrimage where they will associate with saintly people and hear the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, which results, Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Janayati Asyayaganam, which results in knowledge and detachment from the temporal family concerns of this material world. And eventually the husband will go on as a sannyasi and swami, leaving behind the limited family concept, but working for the entire family of living entities in this material world. Sannyasis travel without attachment and preach and enlighten those who are willing and open to hear. Sukadeva Goswami, it's described, was a great sage who in fact spoke the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he used to go to the doors of householders in the morning hours and beg one 12-ounce cup of milk, fresh milk that had just been extracted from the cows. And it is said that he didn't need to even eat. He was so aloof. He was so transcendental. This bodily you was the same you as Krishna. He was so absorbed in thoughts of Krishna that he even assumed the same bodily features as Krishna. So he didn't even really need to eat. He didn't need to go to the worldly-minded householders. He didn't need to interact with them or associate with them in any way on his personal self, but he would go there begging a cup of milk in order to give them the opportunity to get his association. Perhaps they would ask a question about how to extricate themselves from material life, and he would have the opportunity to give them the answer and preach. This is the nature of devotional service, that those who are advanced in devotional service always seek the opportunity to put a bug in the ear of those who are less advanced, to try to plant a seed so that they can eventually make their lives successful, go back to home, back to Godhead. And the ideal spouse and the ideal parent will also teach and act in such a way that their spouse and their children, their grandchildren, all can get liberation from birth, death, disease, and old age and go back to home, back to Godhead. Simply on the strength of doing the one thing, so many other results are accomplished. Rather than striving separately throughout years and years of mundane academic education, striving to become detached through yoga or asceticism, simply by engaging in the service of the Lord, the hard-knotted desires for sexual attraction and connection are released from within the heart, and one becomes so busy in the process of serving the Lord that he or she has no time to sit around. Idle brain is a devil's workshop, ruminating, daydreaming, fantasizing about sex life. It's an antidote. The devotional service protects and insulates one from all the different infatuations that arise in this material world. So, continuing on here, it says, talking about the power of devotional service to the Lord to roll back the influences which entangle us and prolong our sojourn in this material world. Examples given that our desires, foremost amongst them is sex desire, are like rivers flowing in the ocean. We lived in Culver City for 10 years. I was life membership director in the Los Angeles Temple. So there were frequent trips to the beach, and there was one canal out there in Santa Monica where the rivers, or I guess some of it might have been sewage as well, but whatever, there was a flow of water from further inland that emptied out into the ocean, okay? But that was when the tide of the ocean was going out. When the tide of the ocean was going in, that inland channel no longer flowed westward into the ocean, but because of the rising tide of the much greater body of water, the western oceanward flow of the inland canal was not only counteracted, but it was reversed. So that at certain times of the day when the oceanic tide was going in, you could stand by that canal, and instead of flowing west, it was flowing east. Similarly, the power of devotional service of the Lord is such that it can not only counteract the distraction, the draining, the outletting of all one's energies and desires towards the useless rumination and contemplation of sex desire. It can not only counteract, not only stop that dead in its tracks, but it can reverse the flow so that those same desires can be sublimated and transferred into the service of the Lord. So devotees who are deeply involved in devotional service under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master, they use their God-given intelligence by making so many plans for the service of the Lord, the result of which is that stagnant material desires become over-flooded by the desire to serve the Lord. In the 59th verse of the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, this process is being described. Vishaya vinivartate. Vishaya means our tendency towards sense gratification, stimulating the senses, particularly the genitals. Now, this is the cause of our bondage in this material world. Vishaya, sense gratification. The word Vishaya is another word for poison. So for those whose goal in life is to become detached and free and enriched with knowledge, and who have Krishna's lotus feet as their goal, enjoying and making plans for and daydreaming about sense gratification, is just like taking poison. Niskinchana bhagavad bhajan mukasha param jigameshwar bhavashagarasha. Those who want to cross bhavashagara, the vast ocean of material existence, it is the kiss of death to associate with, to see, or to think about materialistic women or materialistic men. So this verse says, Vishavinavadate, how do you get free from this? Because the whole world is running on sex desire. 99.9%. Everywhere you look, you'll hardly see any product advertised. Even Kleenex, even bathroom tissues, there'll always be an attractive woman used to advertise and to get you to buy that. So it's all pervasive. In this sense, Freud was not wrong. So how do you immunize yourself? How do you protect yourself from this insidiousness, you see, which exists like a membrane everywhere we go, particularly in this age? Narahara shadena rajabambashopyaja param drishta vartate. The process is not to restrict, not to close your eyes, close your nose, close your ears, go around blind, try to repress or stifle or ignore all the negative influences that surround us are always knocking in the door. It's not possible to repress that desire, but it is possible to sublimate it, take it to a higher level, get the higher engagement of devotional service, the result of which it says that when one experiences that param drishva, that higher taste, then one never lapses into the lower level of consciousness. Real crude example. Let's say you've been eating dry bread your whole life, stale, dry bread. It's all you've been used to. It's all you've experienced. It's all you knew about. When you think of food, you automatically go to the default setting, dry bread. One day someone comes with a beautiful casserole, lasagna, some Parmesan, all kinds of spices there, and they give you, for the first time in your life, a nice, beautiful piece of lasagna, or enchilada, you see, or eggplant Parmesan, or a pakora, or a samosa, and then you didn't not eat the bread. See what I'm saying? You didn't stop eating the bread, because if you stop eating the bread, you would stop living. So that's not an option. But you stop eating the bread because you're eating something better. Similarly, one can stop the business of this family life and sex life, and which is the hallmark of this material world. One can stop it not by repressing it, but by experiencing something better. Unless one is transcendently situated in this way, it is otherwise not possible just to cease from sense enjoyment by repression. The process of restricting oneself from sense enjoyment, like the Buddhists or various ascetic branches of Hinduism, it is something like restricting a diseased person from certain types of eatables. The patient, he doesn't like those restrictions. And when the doctor tells you you can't eat chocolate because it's making you sick, what happens? You think about chocolate all day long. It tortures you. And you think about it so much you almost can't help but cheat. The point is that you haven't lost your taste for chocolate, and the doctor has even spotlighted it and pinpointed it by restricting it. So it's an extremely stressful, tense situation. You're not supposed to eat it, but at the same time you carry around the desire for it. So you're not going to give up your taste for chocolate until you chase something better. Personally, right at this point in time, I can't really tell you what tastes better than chocolate, but you get the idea, right? So it's similar, it's explained. You can give up your taste for drooling over, hankering over, coveting the touch, smell, taste, and feel of the female form by tasting the beauty of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Alolaka chandaka lasad banya vala vamsi ratnagaram parnayakara yam shayamasundan rachinta gunasharupam govindam maripurusham tamaham vajami. It is said that if you have any attraction for family or friends or country, children, grandchildren, do not, and this is said tongue-in-cheek, so do not see the smiling Krishna standing by the bank of the Yamuna River, Shayambamam Tribangalari, standing in a threefold bending form with the flute to his lips, peacock feather jauntily tucked into his crown, under the moonlight with a smile, Shmaran Bangi Priyacharam on his face, because your mind will be stolen. Your mind will be stolen by the beauty of Krishna, and you will no longer have a taste for dead, dull, material things. Wherever you find restrictions and prohibitions, wherever you find thou shalt not commandments, those are for the less intelligent neophytes in spiritual advancement. But those restrictions do not apply once one actually has developed and awakened one's taste for seeing the beautiful form of the Lord, smelling the incense and flowers that have been offered to the Lord, hearing the kirtan of the Lord, tasting the prasadam of the Lord, and rubbing shoulders and elbows with the devotees of the Lord during the time of the kirtans in the honor of the Lord by his chanting of his holy names. These activities combine to cause one to lose one's taste for material consciousness. However, it must be noted that most people are not liberated in this way. Devotional service is rarely engaged upon by the conditioned souls in this material world. And the fact is that 99.9% of people have totally forgotten their relationship with Krishna, having been dragged down by the mundane affairs of this material world. Here it is explained, Yan maitu nari gramedi sukamitu chum, kandu yanena karayori vadukam dukam, tripjanti neha kropana. Kropana means miserly people. Bahu dukkha means they're subjected to so many miseries because they're not spending their valuable human form of life to attain the highest goal, but they're wasting the human form of life chasing after illicit sex life. Bahu dukkha bhaja kanduvityam manashatyam vishahita dira. Says sex life in this material world is compared to the rubbing of two hands to relieve an itch. And we've all experienced this with a rash or a mosquito bite or some insect bite. You cannot rub it. If you put up with the itch, and it's hard, sometimes it's infuriating, it's maddening, but you have to not indulge yourself in rubbing the itch or the rash, because if you do, it will make it stronger. It will empower the itch, the rash. The more you scratch it, the more irresistible the impulse is to scratch it a second, a third, a fourth, a 45th, a 76th time. So the problem is with scratching the itch, with giving in, with caving to the desires for sex life, is it comes back even stronger, even greater. And in the material world, people think that scratching this itch, and we've all experienced it, it's itching, I know I shouldn't scratch it, I know I shouldn't scratch it, I know I shouldn't scratch it, but then, it feels so good. It feels so good. But then it hurts after a while. You have to stop because it hurts. You're actually rubbing the skin raw. And then it's just a few minutes later that it comes back stronger than ever. So there's no way to extricate yourself from this vicious circle, this catch-22, which is the source of the greatest distress in this material world. But this is how the kripanas, the foolish people, the miserless people, constantly and perpetually chase their tails, going round and around and around, trying, aspiring for, exerting themselves for sensuous, materialistic enjoyment, and never getting satisfied. In fact, having it blaze up more and more brightly in the future. In contrast to these materialistic people, there are the dhira, the sober people who have enough control, enough reins, enough discipline on their senses to tolerate the itching, to not scratch it at all costs. And what happens is it gradually subsides. Gradually becomes less and less and less and less and less. Then it goes away. If you're engaged in the service of the Lord, making flower garlands, singing kirtan, the services of the Lord are sublime, they're blissful, they're done in association with other like-minded people. And so it's easier to not scratch the itch, to tolerate the impulses of material sense gratification when one is packed up in the association of devotees engaged in the service of the Lord. It's so powerful that we have this verse from one of the great alwars, the great saints of South India. I believe this is either Yamunacharya or Kulashekar. This might be Yamunacharya. Yadavi mama chita Krishna pararavinda navana varasha dumani rantamishit taravari batana di sangamena bhavati mukha vika rishristi nisiranamcha. Yamunacharya says that previously, like all others, my life was pretty much dominated on the gross and the subtle level by the attraction between the sexes. But once I experienced on a higher level the sublime engagement of my spiritual senses in the spiritual bhakti yoga service of the Lord, gradually I gave up all hankering for sex life. And now, in my present purified state as a devotee of the Lord, whenever I think to the activities, when I think to the periods of time I wasted pursuing and daydreaming and planning for sex life, my lips curl and I want to spit at the thought. Don't misunderstand. Nothing against women. Women are, yesterday we explained, the better half of men. They're mothers, they're nourishers, they're peacemaker. You can never say enough good things about women. The problem is with the men who, instead of honoring and respect them, they want to exploit them for their own personal sense gratification. You'll never find an advanced devotee of the Lord who will disrespect not only his wife, but any woman in any way whatsoever. They will offer their obeisances. A woman is the pillar of society. In woman is reposed love, shyness, chastity, sweet speech, intelligence. There are so many good qualities listed by Krishna himself in the Bhagavad Gita that adhere to the feminine nature. But at the same time, we find that in this current age, many, many, many women are distracted. Many, many women are misled, primarily by the men. And so that whole syndrome, that whole area of activity, Yamunacharya breathes a sigh of relief. He's so happy that he's no longer part of that quagmire, but now he's on the other side, the side of freedom, the side of liberation, engaged in the service of the Lord. So one example of how entangling and how dangerous sex life can be is given in the 9th chapter. In fact, we're going to cite a couple of examples here by way of winding up our discussion on this verse. And I know we've already been 45 minutes, but it's so instructive and so helpful and so essential for spiritual aspirants to consider these points. And so in the 39th and 40th verse of the 6th chapter of the 9th canto Srimad Bhagavatam, we find the story of Subari Rishi. He was such an advanced mystic and yogi, had such control over his senses that he had been meditating for many, many years underwater, deep in the waters of the river Yamuna. And obviously he couldn't have done that in the first place without a superior level of discipline. And he could not have maintained that yogic practice deep in the waters for a prolonged period of time without being 1 in a million, 1 in a trillion. And yet he happened to see 2 fish engaged in sexual affairs there deep in the waters of the Yamuna River. And that agitated him. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Again, his process was not of engagement, but it was repression. See what I'm saying? The senses are so strong that they, Indriyari Pramatini Balabhadra Tasaham Nigra Vaira Ivasaduskaram, the senses are so strong that they can pull away. Even one of the 5 senses can pull away and cause a fall down, even of a man of discrimination who is very expert at trying to control it. That is exactly what happened to Subari Muni. So being prompted by his awakened senses, he went to the king of the land, King Mandata, and asked for a wife. The king had 50 wives, so he asked for a wife. And Mandata really didn't want to give any of his daughters to this old, smelly, he's been underwater, so you can imagine he's wrinkled like a raisin, ascetic. So Mandata, but he didn't want to offend him, because you know the power of sages to curse is formidable and dangerous. So in a very diplomatic way, Mandata said, of course, any one of my daughters who agrees to marry you, you can take, which was basically a roundabout way of getting out of it. So Mandata then looked at himself, took stock, maybe there were mirrors, and he said, well, obviously, I see what the king's getting at. No one would be interested in an old, wrinkled ascetic who has no riches or wealth to speak of. However, his ascetic power was so great that he was able to transform himself into a completely breathtaking specimen of manhood, so much so that Mandata's plan not to have any of his daughters marry Subari backfired on him, so that when Subari presented himself before the 50 daughters of Mandata, they were so smitten that they all wanted to marry him. So Subari set out to get one wife, and you have to be careful what you wish for, because you might get it multiplied. He ended up with 50 wives, and every one of them was so much smitten by Subari Muni that Each one wanted the undivided attention of Subari. And so that completely destroyed what had formerly been a nice, amiable, amicable, sisterly relationship between all the women. So they quarreled amongst themselves like dogs fighting over a bone. Each one of them contending, he's my husband, he's my husband, he's my husband. No, he's for me, he's for me, he's for me. Now, Subari Muni, again, because he was expert in chanting mantras and his severe austerities, he was able to conjure up a beautiful home, clothes, ornaments, decorated maidservants and manservants, and in the grounds, nicely landscaped parks with clear water lakes and gardens. In the gardens there were many fragrant varieties of flowers. There bees hummed and birds chirped, and there were professional singers. Subari Muni's home, conjured up by his mystic perfection, was amply provided with beautiful beds and couches, ornaments, arrangements for bathing, showers, varieties of sandalwood creams, flower garlands, and palatable dishes. The whole area, the whole household was surrounded by opulent, tasteful paraphernalia. And in this way, the sage engaged in family business with his numerous wives. So in this way, he enjoyed sense gratification, as you can tell, up to the highest level in this material world. None of us can hope to even get within 1,000 miles of the level of sense gratification that Subari Muni achieved, and yet we can take a page from his book without having to experience it ourselves and waste valuable time. We can read about him in the 9th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and about how, when everything is said and done, he was not at all satisfied. The example is given that as fire never ceases blazing if it's constantly supplied with drops of fat, the desire of Subari Muni to achieve satisfaction and contentment through the means of marriage, family, and children was a doomed affair from the very beginning. And Subari mused about his situation. He contemplated his situation, speaking to himself in the following way: alas, while practicing austerity, even within the depths of the water, and while observing all the repressive rules and regulations practiced by saintly persons, I lost the results of my long austerities simply by associating with the sexual affairs of the fish. And he says, everybody should observe my fall down and learn from it. If Subari couldn't achieve satisfaction, how are you going to achieve satisfaction with one wife and who henpecks you, and a tinderbox house in the suburbs, and a little Toyota Corolla in the driveway, and going out for pizza on Friday nights? How are you going to be satisfied when Subari Muni was far from it? Therefore, don't waste time and be a foolish person. If you desire liberation, if you desire contentment and satisfaction from material bondage, you must make a plan to become engaged in the service of the Lord, and consequently giving up the association of persons' interest in sex life, and resolve not to employ your senses in self-stimulation. If possible, one can go and chant Hare Krishna and serve the Lord in a beautiful, secluded place in the forests or in the jungles. But if that's not possible, remain a satsange tyage vaishnavachara sri sange eka ashara Krishna bhakta ara. You don't have to give up your position, you don't have to give up your family, you don't have to give up your children, but you just have to give up the illusion, the false desire to enjoy through the indulgence of the senses, and rather fix your mind on the beautiful, enchanting form of the Supreme Personality of God, the form which defeats the beauty of millions and millions and millions of cupids. And if you want to do this in the easiest, most effective way possible, seek the association, satsange tya, give up the association of materialists and seek the association of devotees who are similarly engaged in the service of the Lord. Sadhu Sangha, Savashastahai, Lavamata Sadhu Sangha, Savashirahai. One moment's association with devotees engaged in the service of the Lord is the most valuable asset that one can get in this material world. And Subari continues his ruminations here. In the beginning, I was alone and engaged in the performance of austerities of mystic yoga, but later, because of my association of fish engaged in sex, I desired to marry. Then I became the husband of 50 wives, and in each one of them, get this again. You want to be happy through marriage and children and sense gratification? Well, here's what Subari Muni achieved, and he was not at all happy. He says, I became the husband of 50 wives, and in each of them I begot 100 sons, and thus my family increased to 5,000 members. Thus there is no end to my material desires for enjoyment in this life. What was the result? 50 wives, 100 sons by each. It just caused the fire to blaze up brighter and brighter and brighter. It's funny because in Mormon, Utah, they're the largest families of any other place in America. The average number of children is 10. And people are wonderful parents. They even adopt a lot of unfortunate kids to give them a better chance in life. So when the pandemic hit, there was a joke circulating in Utah. The Governor Herbert declared that there should not be more than 10 people gathered in one place at a time. And so the joke that went around in Utah was households were trying to figure who had to move out because you couldn't have more than 10 people gathered in one place. Subari Muni had a household of 5,000, and yet he was not at all happy. Just to quote one other personality who achieved a similar level of success in terms of family, wives, and children was Yayati Maharaj. And Yayati Maharaj describes in also the same canto, 9th canto, 19th verse, 19th chapter, 18th verse. Yayati had just gotten married to Devyani, and he had on the side Sarmishta. He was young, his senses were strong. He was enjoying with his wife Devyani, had a little something going on the side with Sarmishta. And so he was looking forward to spending his youth, playing both ends against the middle, playboy, philanderer, a lot of people like that around nowadays. In those days, it was rare. Nowadays, pretty much everyone fits that description. But he got caught and cursed by his father-in-law to be struck with premature old age. And so in one stroke, he went from being a virile young fellow to be an old, decrepit guy. But he wasn't satisfied. He obviously had just gotten started. His appetite had been whetted. He was looking forward to 50 years at least of strong sex life. So he asked his various sons, if they would swap with him their youth for his old age. And then when he got finished, when he was finally satisfied with indulgence, then he would swap back again and they would have his gratitude. In fact, they would be his heir. So his eldest son and his second son, his third son, his fourth son, all refused him. But his fifth son, Puru, agreed. And so he got his youth back. And in those days, they had longer lifespan than we do today. He spent literally 1,000 years by the calculations of the demigods engaging his senses. And finally he came to that point where he realized you cannot satisfy the senses. It says, Purnam Bhashra Sahasrame Bishan Tatapi Chevirum Tishna Teshapajayate. He said, hey, along with the testimony of Subari Muni, here I'm adding my testimony. I enjoyed sense gratification with multi-wives and multi-children for 1,000 years by the calculation of the demigods and still not satisfied. It's like pouring ghee on the fire and expecting the fire to go out. So achieving this level of realization, it's not that his senses were satisfied, but he realized this is a vain pursuit. So then the very nice verse comes here. Purnam Vaishya Sahasrame Visayan Sevati Tatapi Chanashanam Tishnu Teshu Pajayate. Purnam Vaishya Sevitam Vashapagam Sadbhagam Vishayashu Sananam Vichedam Jata Pakshi Mandajam. It says just like a little baby bird, they can't fly, they don't have wings, they're just scrawny and ugly. They simply sit there with their mouths open and get fed. But as they gain strength, They add feathers, their wings sort of flesh out. They sit at the edge of the nest and look at the long drop. They meditate and they meditate and they meditate. They run through it in their mind. They envision it happening. And then finally, one day, something stirs from within. They get up on the edge of the nest and they jump. They launch themselves out into thin air and spread their wings. And intuitively, they know that they're now capable. And they begin to flap their wings. And then they fly. From being nest-bound, they go to the opposite pole of extraordinary freedom once they leave the nest, having achieved a certain level of maturity. So similarly, Yayati, having realized the total futility of seeking for happiness through the indulgence of the senses and through family, friends, children, grandchildren, he gave it all up, just as a bird jumps from the nest. And it has to be sudden. Of course, gradually one can meditate on it, envision it, plan it, but the actual break has to be sudden and irrevocable. Just like it's do or die. When that little baby jumps out, I'm gonna fly or I'm gonna die. Similarly, at that time when one, according to time and circumstances and realization, one quits the program of trying to indulge one's senses and tries to achieve a detachment and knowledge, engage along with the devotees of the Lord in the service of the Lord. It's a do or die thing. You can't do it halfway. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Chanakapanda says you cannot continue doing sense gratification and still be a viable candidate for liberation. So follow in the footsteps of Sabari Muni, who eventually gave it up. Follow in the footsteps of Yayati, who leapt away from family, friends, and children, grandchildren concerns, just like a bird launches it from itself in the nest. Be very cautious. Sex life, the association of the opposite sex, can be a great boon, as it has been for me, Radhika Raman. And there are so many other stories about how productive life in partnership and service of the Lord is the most satisfying, purposeful, and fulfilling and loving way to spend the duration of one's human form of life. But be very, very careful, because from these two stories and many others, we learn that many stalwarts in the devotional line fell victim to the allurements and retreated from the path of liberation because of money and sex. But the great good news is that when you're helped, when you chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and you access the assistance and help and power of the Lord, the whole process of becoming disentangled from family life, from birth, death, disease, and old age, and launching oneself and one's loved ones, one's spouse, one's children, back to home, back to Godhead, becomes very easy by the divine grace of the Lord. By the grace of the Lord, such devotees get sufficient strength to defend themselves from the state of disturbance in this material world and gradually become free. And this is our concluding statement. I know we've gone longer than we should have. I know you have many things to do on your day's list of activities. I appreciate your taking the extra time, but I think if you're here now, just let me read this next little bit as our concluding words, and then we'll let you go. It is said in the 7th canto, 5th chapter, 23rd verse, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam, words by Prahlad Maharaj. Prabhupada explains, the word Smaranam means remembering. If we chant and hear, then Smaranam, remembrance, will automatically come. And with Smaranam, then we will engage in worshiping Krishna's lotus feet, which is the 4th item of devotional service, Sevanam. And when we're doing Shravanam Vishnu Smaranam Sevanam, then we will engage in the temple worship, which is called Archanam, or offering prayers. And once we do Smaranam Vishnu Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam Sevanam Archanam, then we will gradually go to the next item of devotional service, which is Vandanam. And then following that, we will become Dasyam, servants of Krishna. After Dasyam, we become Sakyam, friends of Krishna. And then we finally arrive at the point of Atma Nivedam, offering everything to Krishna. That is the process of Krishna consciousness. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Shmaranam, Atma, Sakyam, Vandanam, Archanam, Atma, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atma, Nivedanam. This is the process of Krishna consciousness. So thanks for your patience. That concludes our week-long discussion of the 36th verse in the 3rd chapter, the 1st canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. I think we've pretty much ruminated, looked at the issue from all different points of view. We've seen the negatives. We've learned what we need to be cautious and wary of. We've also seen the positives, how family and children need not necessarily be a burden, a distraction, but they can be an incredible boost, an incredible asset in one's march back to home, back to Godhead. So each one of us has to take stock at our own situation, single, married, however we are situated in life, and pray to the Lord, Lord, show me the best way to move forward, back to home, back to Godhead, ultimate liberation, ultimate freedom, ultimate joy, ultimate peace, ultimate satisfaction, ultimate fulfillment of all the inner desires of my heart, along with as many of my friends, associate, and family members as who are open and willing to accept the teachings and the practice of Bhagavad Dharma and accompany me back to home, back to Godhead. Om Tat Sat. Thank you, Anjali. Anjali is particularly active with the emojis. She's our emoji queen. Joe, thank you. Rupa Manjari, Malini Preeti. I always love to see your beautiful smile in your Facebook posts, your enthusiasm for prasadam and book distribution. Jimmy and Taruni, thank you for your consistency. Thank you for being with us day after day, lending your oral reception. Guru Tran Singh, also another regular. Harsha, new person dropping in. I hope that you found something helpful and that you'll rejoin us next week when we resume these morning Bhagavatam classes every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday morning at 7:30 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. Terry, Hare Krishna. Govinda Dev, Hare Krishna. Thank you so much. Govinda, another Shundari Priya. Appreciate the service that you do. Jean, thanks for being a regular. By Bobby, my better half by far. Ishmael, thank you for joining us. Ishmael Raju. If you have any questions, Jagat Das, a new Biju, lots of new people. Yudha, lots of new people. Dayaniti, thanks. This is Wild Anradamit. You can give me the pronunciation guide in the comments. Yudha. Grace, thank you, Grace. Mary, one of my favorite people in the whole world. What a wonderful. Sunday Lanka, go cool. Jai Vekaria, thank you, Jai. Prashant, if you want to follow the breadcrumbs of verses that made up this day's talk, Prashant puts all the links in the comment section. And as I mentioned yesterday, a really good way to have a thread running through your day, which will ensure that you'll always be up, you'll always be in connection with Spirit. So take one of the verses that Prashant is giving you the link to and just try to memorize it. Try and put it in your phone and refer back to it at various times of the day. You know, the secret is not memorization. The secret is repetition. You know, I know that the verse may be intimidating. You may think, well, how could I ever learn this? It's another language and yada, 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 yada. But just, I have 10 joints on my fingers, okay? Savaram Padijaga Mame Kamsara Hum Tum Zero. Savaram Padijaga Mame Kamsara Hum Tum Zero. And I'll each time I want to memorize a verse, I'll count, I'll do it 10 times. Maybe the joints of my fingers are 10. And if I have time, I'll do it another 10 times. And it is just by repetition. You don't have to worry about memorizing it. Just repeat it consistently, daily. And it won't be even like 2 or 3 days. It'll start to just pop into your mind. You don't have to memorize it. You don't have to recall it. It'll just be there. It'll just be a part of you. So the key to retaining these verses and embedding them, it's not memorization. It's just repetition. Rasangi, always delighted to have you here. Vasu, 3rd day in a row. Vasu's been with us Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Thank you so much. Lakshmi Deshringa, Haribo. I put your link, Facebook link online. Lakshmi, I think, is daily, 7:30 also, same general time period is us. Taran, Advaita Acharya, thank you from across the street. Nate, who keeps KHQN Krishna Radio on the air. If you're in the Utah Valley, you can get it, 1480 on your dial. Otherwise, you can get it anywhere in the world that there are internet connection. Just pick up a free app like Free Radio. There's so many different apps. You'll be able to get it anywhere in the world. Rahul, thank you for joining us. Sorry we went a little overtime today, but I can't help myself. I just got carried away, and I'm still humming. I'm still glowing from the after effects that you so kindly allowed me by sticking with us for this prolonged period of time and letting me discourse on what little I know about devotional service of the Lord. I'm very indebted and grateful to you. We'll see you again. We'll let you go. Class is dismissed. And hopefully we'll see you on the weekend maybe. We have our motivational talks Saturday nights at 5:15. And we also have them at 7 o'clock in the evening. Saturday night at 7, Sunday at 5:15. We also have the Krishna Light Show Sundays at 1 o'clock. And we have our weekly Sadhu Sangh Salt Lake City Zoom call at 11 o'clock. You can consult our Facebook page for the password and the meeting ID. We also do it on Facebook Live. So plenty of opportunities to intersect. There are plenty of other great speakers, obviously like Radhika Raman, Dr. Ravi Gupta, who are available to take you to the next level of your devotional service. Until we meet again, please keep chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.